Hello everyone, this is Mr. Lawbeck. In this video, we are going to go over some important items from the Gilded Age. We will specifically go over the idea of captains of industry versus robber barons debate. We will take a closer look at a couple of the captains of industry from the Gilded Age. We'll examine horizontal and vertical integration, what trusts and holding companies were during the Gilded Age, the concepts of social Darwinism, and the gospel of wealth. Let's start by talking about the debate between captains of industry or robber barons. Over the course of the late 1800s, entrepreneurs like Cornelius Vanderbilt, Andrew Carnegie, John D. Rockefeller, and J.P. Morgan helped to shape the growth of American industry. Some people saw them as captains of industry because they were inventive, hardworking, and led the way in the rise of American business. This captain of industry moniker was considered to be more positive. Others saw them as robber barons because they were ruthless and self-centered entrepreneurs whose aggressive business practices destroyed the smaller competitors and drove many companies out of business. So the ongoing debate is, were these industrial leaders captains of industry or robber barons? Now, there are a lot of variables, and it's really up to the individual to decide. So let's talk about a couple of these industrial leaders. John Rockefeller was a man who started from meager beginnings and eventually created an oil empire. He organized the Standard Oil Company. By 1877, he controlled 95% of all the refineries in the United States. Later in life, he turned his attention to charity. He made possible the founding of the University of Chicago and endowed many other institutions. Rockefeller gave away more than $540 million in his lifetime, including funding towards medical research, addressing poverty in the South, and educational efforts for African Americans. Andrew Carnegie was an industrialist who led the expansion of the American steel industry. He created a steel empire by maximizing profits and minimizing inefficiencies through ownership of factories, raw materials, and transportation infrastructure involved in steelmaking. We'll talk more about that in a moment. Carnegie brought the Bessemer process to the U.S. steel industry, which, without getting too technical, could quickly and relatively inexpensively change iron into steel. He built the Carnegie Steel Company, which later became U.S. Steel, and eventually sold it to J.P. Morgan. Carnegie was well known for the demand that he put on his workers. The life of a 19th century steel worker was certainly grueling. Carnegie's workers routinely worked 12-hour shifts 7 days a week. Carnegie gave his workers a single holiday, the 4th of July. We will see this later on, but Carnegie was very well known for not being very friendly to labor unions. Some other big names to mention would be Cornelius Vanderbilt, who was a railroad and shipping tycoon. J.P. Morgan, who ran a banking empire, bailed out the U.S. in the Panic of 1893 and bought and merged companies like AT&T. It is important to note that during this time, the U.S. government followed a laissez-faire policy regarding the economy. Both Democrats and Republicans, for the most part, did not want the government to get involved in the U.S. economy, so there were not a lot of regulations. There were two main kinds of consolidation in the late 19th century: horizontal and vertical integration. First, vertical integration. Vertical integration is a business or corporation that holds control over every phase of the process of the business, as shown in the 1873 Carnegie Steel Company example. Carnegie owned the iron mines through the steel mills, starting with the extraction of the raw materials to transportation, manufacturing, and distribution. Carnegie and his companies basically controlled every aspect of the economic process of the steel industry. This was known as vertical integration. Horizontal integration is a business strategy in which one company acquires or merges with another that operates at the same level in an industry. Great example of this was Rockefeller's Standard Oil, that often bought other oil companies to eliminate competition. And again, eventually, Rockefeller and Standard Oil would control 95% of the U.S. oil production. So vertical integration and horizontal integration were two common business models of big business. So trusts and holding companies. What were trusts? Trusts were a business structure that stockholders in several companies transferred their shares to a single board of trustees. Trusts gave the illusion to the public that various companies were competitive with each other when in fact they were actually controlled by one board of trustees. A holding company was a company that owned part or all of other companies' stock in order to extend monopoly control. Often, a holding company does not produce goods or services of its own, but only exists to control the management of other companies. Again, there were not a whole lot of regulations preventing things like trusts and holding companies from existing. Both trust and holding companies were used to gain a monopoly in an industry or a certain business endeavor. Social Darwinism. Social Darwinism was a set of beliefs that explain and justify how a small group of business and industrial leaders could accumulate such great wealth. They applied Darwin's theory of survival of the fittest to society. According to social Darwinists, individuals and corporations are also engaged in a ruthless struggle for profit in which only the fit survive and succeed. Carnegie and Rockefeller believed in this philosophy. They believed that wealth is a reward for hard work and talent, while poverty is a punishment for laziness and bad judgment. Social Darwinists believe that governments must therefore resist the temptation to regulate economic activity by supporting wage increases and social welfare programs. Social Darwinists thought such policies were harmful to society as a whole, and it would disincentivize those struggling to work harder. Now, despite a belief in social Darwinism, many of these industrial leaders were very charitable. In The Gospel of Wealth, Andrew Carnegie argued that extremely wealthy Americans like himself had a responsibility to spend their money in order to benefit the greater good. He famously said, "The man who dies rich dies disgraced." Carnegie funded retirement pensions for teachers, established the Carnegie Institute of Technology, later known as Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh today, and set up scientific research centers and organizations devoted to world peace. He also furnished towns across the globe with everything from libraries, music halls, to swimming pools. Carnegie ended up giving away much of his fortune in these charitable endeavors. Carnegie also started a wave of philanthropy that many other industrial leaders followed. Now for some big takeaways. Remember that during the Gilded Age, the government took a laissez-faire attitude towards American business. The government philosophy was basically stay out of the way and let the economy handle and correct itself. Capitalism works in the best interest of everyone ultimately was the philosophy. While this allowed American industry and the economy as a whole to take great leaps, it also created a lot of concern. Many of these captains of industry had a lot of positive contributions to society, but there, of course, were also negative aspects to them. All right, everybody, that's it for this video. I hope this helps you better understand some of the important items from the Gilded Age. Have a great rest of the day.